Hoje teremos uma entrevista que muito nos alegra. Conseguimos um momento com a professora Nergis Canefe. Ela é presidente da Associação Internacional para Estudos de Migração Forçada. É professora titular de Ciência Política, Políticas Públicas e Direito da Universidade de York, em Toronto, no Canadá. Sua especialidade é a filosofia política, direitos humanos críticos, direito penal internacional e estudos de imigração forçada. No momento, ela está em Durham, ao norte da Inglaterra. Professor Canefe, good afternoon. Welcome to our interview, and thank you very much for your time and the rich contribution.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be with you.
Okay, so are you ready to our interview to talk about an overview of the situation of your research?
Yes.
Let's start. Great. So, Professor, I have a first question for you. You have done very deep research in the area of displaced people.
Mm-hmm.
What is your overview for this year, 2026, in Africa, Middle East, for example, Gaza, Lebanon, Democratic Republic of Congo? Can you tell us?
Yes, I mean, as of May 2026, about 122 million are forcibly displaced worldwide, and that includes the most recent 1.5 million in Lebanon. Major crises are happening in Africa and the Middle East. They dominate the scene of forced migration, and some of the old-fashioned forced displacement is intensified by climate change, as well as other low-grade regional warfare. So the big four returns that UNHCR and UN mention are Democratic Republic of Congo, about 1.9 million people returned, Syria, 1.5 million people returned and more are returning, Sudan, 1.2, and Afghanistan, just this year alone, about 900,000 returned. And the problem is many of these returns are not necessarily voluntary, safe, or dignified, but they're driven by enforced returns. So there's no guarantee that these populations will not resort to migration again. So although the Israeli attacks on the occupied territories in Lebanon and Iran are the forefront, Sudan actually remains the site of world's most severe humanitarian and displacement disaster. After 3 years of civil war, approximately 12 million people have fled their homes and 9 million remain internally displaced in Sudan, and 4 million Sudanese crossed into neighboring countries of Chad and Egypt. And we kind of continue to see the increase of the crises, as well as widespread famine and total system collapse. We know that within Iran, there are about 2 million and upcoming are internally displaced. In Gaza, after more than 2 years of conflict, approximately 1.9 million, or 90% of the population, are internally displaced, and many of them multiple times. So this is a chain displacement. And in many of the war-torn countries, the destruction of housing and lack of safe zones have turned displacement into a real struggle for survival. In Iran, in addition to the millions displaced internally, there's an increasing number of people who are also leaving the country. Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, have been a site of displacement and forced migration for quite some time, but the movements have intensified, and internal displacement is projected to reach 9 million people by the end of 2026. None of these are governed or regulated in such a way that the government or the state would recognize the internal displaced people as an internal crisis and provide immediate support. So let's come closer to where you are, Monica. And in Latin America, we kind of shifted from temporary migration to long-term structural and multi-stage internal displacement. The Venezuelan exodus remains as the largest crisis in the region, but security collapses in Haiti and Ecuador also created multipolar emergencies. As you know, nearly 8 million people in Venezuela have been displaced, both internally and globally, and it became a protracted crisis. Colombia currently hosts 2.8 million Venezuelans, followed by Peru and Brazil. And rising xenophobia, as well as lack of legal status in host countries, are prompting some to return to Venezuela, but their return does not necessarily guarantee their welfare. Now, Haiti is facing its most severe internal displacement crisis in decades, with over 1.4 million people being displaced. And most of the displacements are actually occurring in rural areas. And almost 6 million people in Haiti, which is half the population, also face acute food insecurity, making migration and ongoing migration a matter of survival. Ecuador, which is not too far from you, now ranks third in the region for displacement due to violence, systemic violence, following Haiti and Colombia. The government's declaration of internal armed conflict has resulted in over 300,000 internal displacements since 2022, and there's escalating urban warfare. In Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador continue to face a silent crisis of displacement, prompting UN action to prevent famine among the displaced peoples during their northbound migration. Africa, the highest concentration of forced migration crisis globally is in Africa, over 40 million people displaced. These movements are driven by civil wars, extreme climate change, and declining humanitarian funding to crisis zones. As I said, Sudan remains the most severe case, and over 4.3 million of Sudanese have fled to neighboring countries. International bodies report that both sides of the Sudanese conflict are actually using food or access to food as a weapon, and over 21 million people face acute food insecurity, and famine has already been confirmed in North Darfur and South Kordofan. So when we come to Central and Eastern Africa, we again see protracted displacement. DRC, as I said, and Ethiopia represent long-term structural crises in terms of forced displacement. And 1.2 million Congolese refugees are currently in neighboring states with no immediate plans for return. A significant trend last year that emerged is also the geographic extension of the conflict beyond the eastern kibbutz into western provinces, as well as increasing use of armed drones in civilian areas, which is also affecting refugee camps. Ethiopia, on the other hand, adopted a roadmap for refugee inclusion, aiming to integrate 1.1 million refugees into its national health and education systems. Although internal stability remains fragile, this is a noteworthy effort. Asia is not so different. Pakistan, Bangladesh, Rohingya crisis, and South Asia and Vietnam, these are the main areas. So that's it.
Let me ask you other question. Do you think violence is increasing more in rural areas than in the city?
Normally, we used to think that the cities are where most of the violence against refugee populations take place. And xenophobia is very high. But I think in terms of where the migrants are originating from, I would say that indeed rural areas lead the way, but the migration then takes place towards the cities. So the original places, unless there's a war situation, tend to be rural areas. And I think Brazil is a good example for that in terms of development-induced displacement.
Okay. Um, what's your words about Eastern Europe? Can you explain me more?
I mean, yes, Eastern Europe is an interesting conglomeration, in the sense that obviously we have the Russian war against Ukraine that's been going on for quite some time, and we have almost 4 million internal displaced and 5.8 million Ukrainians living as refugees abroad in Europe. But you also have internal Russian displacements. And Germany hosts most of the refugees because of the arrangements after the Second World War. But increasingly, other European countries are hosting some of the Ukrainian, Estonian, and Lithuanian and Belarusian refugees. But you also have in the Southern Caucasus ethnic Armenians leaving Karabakh, some movement in Iran-Armenia border, continuing issues about the Kurdish population, many of whom end up in Europe as refugees. There is, of course, the Mediterranean route, where you have about 30,000 deaths this year alone, in terms of the crossing of the Mediterranean Sea and refugees trying to get to Europe.
I know that right now you are in Durham, north of England, right?
Yes.
Can you tell me your experience? What are you doing there? What's your research?
I am here as part of their Global Security Institute and International Center for Middle Eastern Studies. I'm a fellow, and I came here to do work on disappearances in the Middle East and lack of acknowledgement of disappearances in a comparative context. So for instance, disappearances under the former Iraqi regime, under the Syrian regime, disappearances in Cyprus, disappearances in Lebanon, disappearances in Israel. These are things that are happening under government custody. So they're not communal affairs. They're actually state-led or state-condoned disappearances where the body is never returned and there's no closure. This might look like a bit of a diversion from what I normally do, but I carry the hat of a scholar of international criminal law, so this is something very dear to me. And there is a group of scholars who work on disappearances here.
Mm-hmm. All right. Oh, finally, what are your concluding words on this interview, about your memories, about your experiences? What's your concluding words so far?
I think externalization of migration control is becoming a global phenomenon. Borders are going higher and higher, either because of technologies that they use or because they second immigration governance to countries whereby they pay money to keep the refugees and immigrants away. And so this is creating large populations in limbo, waiting in detention centers. It used to be the camps. It no longer is the camps. And secondly, climate change needs to be redefined. I think it's not just natural phenomena like extreme flooding or droughts, but there is anthropocenic developments, human-made disasters, which then lead to massive displacements. And it leads to what we call protracted precarity and multi-stage migration. So the local population, mostly rural population, is moved to somewhere else, but they cannot make ends meet, and then they move again, and they move again, and they sometimes move across the border. So especially forced migration is never from A to B. It's very rarely, if ever, from A to B. And my work, the last few years, I've been working on new forms of statelessness, de facto statelessness. So sometimes it looks like you do have some sort of a citizenship, but you have no right of return, no documentation. And so you live in limbo. It's a de facto statelessness. That's a growing phenomenon as well. Lastly, I want to talk about the children. Currently, about 40% of the refugee population are under the age of 16. These are children, these are minors. And in addition to rights abuses, this amounts to what we call the lost generation effect. These children literally grow up on the move or in camps or in detention centers. They have very little, if any, access to education. And they're kind of marred for life because of complex trauma. So these are some of the very important aspects of new trends, I think.
Okay, Professor. We appreciate very much your words. Thank you for your contribution. And we hope to see you again here in Brazil, in João Pessoa. Okay?
Yes, I hope so too. I hope so too. Thank you so much for having me.
You're always very welcome here. Goodbye.
Goodbye.